Hello everyone and welcome back to another video from our series Mikhail Botvinnik versus Mikhail Tal 1961 World Championship match. So the previous game number 8 was won by Tal. What a fantastic game. Also do check that out. So this is game number 9 and until now Mikhail Tal is not in the lead. Botvinnik is in the lead with so before previous game, Botvinnik was in the lead of 2 points, and after Tal won the previous game, so Tal did manage to reduce the lead to 1 point. So this is game number 9, and Botvinnik is still in the lead with 1 point. And let's see what happens in this game. As this game, Botvinnik is with the white pieces, so anything can happen. Uh, Before we let me just yeah. So without further ado, let's get started. So Botvinnik opens with c4, the English opening. Tal replies knight f6. Botvinnik goes knight c3 and e5. So if Tal had pushed on e6, then maybe Botvinnik had gone for the queen's gambit, kind of a Nimzo Indian line with bishop to b4. But here Tal goes for e5, taking the center, and Botvinnik replies g3 to develop the light square bishop. So c6 and knight f3. Now Tal goes for immediately the attack e4 and knight goes to d4. Tal goes d5, solidifying the pawn on e e4, but to which Botvinnik simply takes c cross d5 and queen b6, putting pressure on the knight. So you can't take the pawn over here. If you take the pawn over here, then you will lose the knight. So knight b3. So here kind of Botvinnik says that this is also a decent move. Uh, After the match, he kinds of add that uh, yeah, just a minute. Uh, Let me find the game. Yeah, he says that the game that followed knight c2. So this position was before this position for was reached from the game of Mikhanis against Taimonov in 1960, and in that game they followed a knight to c2, which was more common even now. So although after continuous divide, so the Botvinnik says knight b3 was a decent move, not a bad move. Yeah. So let's proceed the game. So c cross d5, supporting the pawn, and bishop b g2. So Botvinnik develops his bishop to so that he can castle king side in his next move. And Tal here straight away goes for a5, d3, and a4. Tal is just maybe just I think he's pushing to confuse Botvinnik maybe, but this kind of a4 early push is a double-edged sword To which Botvinnik replies bishop e3, developing the bishop and also attacking the queen, so Tal can't take on the knight. So queen b4 and knight d4 and a3, attacking this pawn as this pawn is protecting the knight over here. So Botvinnik replies knight c2, attacking the queen, counter attacking the queen, queen cross b2 and bishop b4, because now this knight was undefended, so bishop d4 protecting this knight and bishop b4, so double attacking on the knight. And to which Botvinnik replies knight cross b4 because you need to take that bishop, and queen cross b4 and bishop cross f6 and g cross f6. Here if first you kind of take this, yeah, no, you can't take this because the bishop is protecting this knight. Yeah, so g cross f6. Now Botvinnik castles. uh, Here you can't take on the knight because, so if you want you can feel free to pause the video and try to find out why you can't take on the knight. So I will give you a couple of seconds for that. So simplest move, those who have found it, congratulations, and I will share the solution now. So simplest move is rook c1, attacking the queen, and if queen moves anywhere else, then you simply lose this bishop. And after this, the option for best option for black is to simply take the rook and give up the queen. And another option is queen c6, but that also leads to the same. Or maybe you take with the knight to develop the knight. So you can't take the bishop, you can't take the knight over here, and bishop e6 and rook c1, so now protecting the knight, and knight c6, so d cross e4 and d cross e4. So simply now Botvinnik takes this pawn, knight cross e4 and bishop cross a2, maybe thinking that because Botvinnik has this very strong pawn chain over here, so he kind of exchange his this pawn for his weak a pawn, because this is an isolated pawn and most probably that was not going to work. To promote it, it would be very difficult. So kind of, if you see, then Botvinnik has exchanged his good pawns for the bad pawns. Now Tal has 3 pawn islands. These are double pawns, and this is a single pawn island, which would be very difficult for Tal to get an advantage. As this is only the weakness of, I guess, Tal, because he kind of he goes for a attack all out. So let's move further. So bishop cross a2 and now knight d6. Here you can also play knight f6 check. That also works. And many moves here work. Knight f6 check works. E3 works. E3 work. Knight f6 check. But here, if we see a very brilliant move, which is a disgusting engine line, then it's rook c5. And what it does that it kind of activates this rook, and once you after you capture this pawn, you can bring rook over here and give checks. So that was the just I shared an engine line. So knight d6, and maybe Botvinnik gave this check to exchange this pawn, so that now this also pawn becomes very weak over here. If you see, Botvinnik is constantly playing on the principle of this, that he is leaving Tal with bad pawns. So maybe that's why this check, and king f8 and knight takes on b7. Here also the queen can't take this knight. So once again you can feel free to pause the video and try to find out why. Because simply this bishop takes on c6, and now this is pinned. So the knight can't be captured, and so Tal plays knight e5, and first Botvinnik brings knight to the safety, knight c5 and rook b8, doubling up the queen. And also this square is also controlled by three black pieces, so Tal would be thinking to exchange more and more pieces over here. And also Tal is down in material and with a very bad position, so he wouldn't mind to exchange pieces. So knight a6 and forking the queen and a rook, and to which Tal replies bishop b3, counter attacking and attacking on the queen. So you can't take, you can take, but you will also get us equal material. So here Botvinnik goes for knight cross d4 and bishop cross d1, as Botvinnik would be happy to exchange pieces, and rook f cross d1. So rook cross b4 and a1. So this way also now Botvinnik is also attacking this pawn over here. Although you can protect it, but let's see what Botvinnik plays. What Tal plays. Tal plays rook b2, attacking the pawn on e2. King f1. Botvinnik simply moves the king and protect, because now we are in a end game. So moving the king and bringing king to the center is more important. So king a g7 and rook cross a3. Rook c8 and bishop b4. So rook e8, maybe trying to x-ray the bishop. So if knight moves, then there is also double attack on this pawn also. So rook a4, rook e7 and bishop f5. Rook c7 and rook h4, now attacking the pawn on h7. So Tal replies h6 and rook backs to a4. Rook c5, once again try to x-ray this bishop and attack, somehow move the knight and attack it. So to which Botvinnik replies h3, knight c4 and bishop d3, also protect this pawn and also attack the knight. Knight e5 and bishop e4, knight c4 and bishop back to d3. So maybe they would be reaching here time control, the first time control. So bishop d3, knight e5, bishop e4, repeating moves, knight c4 and king e1 now. Obviously Botvinnik don't want a draw because he has very superior pawn chain, and he has an extra pawn also, and he has a bishop against the knight. So Botvinnik is in very good position. So Tal goes knight e5. Sorry about that. Yeah. And rook a to d4. Rook c3 attacking. Maybe try to attack this pawn. Let's see. So rook 1 to d2. So exchange the rook, try to exchange, and Tal first goes for rook c1 check, to which Botvinnik replies simply rook d1 and rook c3 and f4. Try to give up this pawn, but he is attacking the knight. So f5 and bishop cross f5. Why did Tal give up one another pawn? Maybe just to free his king and make a escape route over here or something like that. So bishop cross f4 and knight c4. Rook 4 to d3, attacking the rook, and rook c to c2. So doubling up the rook. So as there were double attack on this pawn, so bishop g4 protecting that pawn, and rook a2, rook b3 and king g6, bringing king to the center, king f2 and knight d2. So with a threat to give a check, and if give a check, then it would, if any another move, then it would be very difficult for Botvinnik to protect. So rook e3, adding one more defender to the pawn. So if it also controls the e4 square, so knight can't give any checks. Very, because knight can't go over there. Yeah. So knight c4 attacking the rook, and rook back to b3, knight d2, rook e3 and knight c4, and now rook e8. You can't lose the defense of this pawn. So knight d2 once again, and rook e5 and king f6 and rook f5 check, king g6 and rook e5, king f6, and now bishop h5, blocking the king. Now every king can't move anywhere else, and only this is the only escape square for the king. It's not completely blocked, but Tal plays rook c3 and h4, rook c4 and bishop back to f3, rook back to c2 and bishop d5, rook a4. As the rook was under attack, bishop f3 protecting, and rook a2, once again repeating the position. So now also Botvinnik add one more defense to the e2 pawn, rook e1 and rook a4. Once again, just waiting, because there is no good move for white in this position. h5 and rook c3, bishop d2, not exchanging the bishop, and rook c2, rook d1, and rook a3, bishop b5, or protects against doubling up the rook, and rook a4, king e1, and rook d4. Now also attacking this bishop, but that's not a big threat. Bishop g2 and knight b3. So here Botvinnik simply exchanges the rook, rook cross d4 and knight cross d4, because why not? Botvinnik is upper material. King f2 and knight e6, bishop e4, and rook b2 as the rook was attacked, rook f6, f5 check, king g7, and rook back to d5, king f6, and king f3. And in this position Tal resigns, and Botvinnik is once again in the 2 points of lead. And what a game. So on move number 73, Tal resigns and Botvinnik wins another game. So now Botvinnik is in 2 points of lead, and what a game, just what a game. So you know the drill. If you like it, leave a like. Because why did he resign? Because Botvinnik is up 2 pawns, and simply he will be able to win this. There won't be any difficulty for Botvinnik to, because this g3, g4, and g5 are coming, and you can't avoid that. Uh, So once again Botvinnik wins and he's in 2 points of lead. And with that said, you all know the drill. If you like it, leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching as always.